UTSA football post-game wrap-up. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Coming to you following the UTSA beatdown of North Texas. 49-17. The Roadrunners lead this thing from start to finish.
Yeah. Well, they scored late in the first quarter, and then it was 28-7 at halftime, and then, it was never competitive.
I think that second quarter was the biggest at start there. 21 points for the Roadrunners, 28 total. And just UTSA had it going on all cylinders today.
We got to talk about Sincere McCormick, I think. 251 yards.
A little record.
Obviously a program single-game record, breaking his own record, which, he's probably the top 5 or so by now with the season that he's had.
Every game.
Now he's got 11 touchdowns, which is the single-season record, and he's just incredible. He's the nation's leading rusher, 1,345 yards, I think.
I think the biggest stat that's kind of low-key being overlooked is he's going to become the all-time leading rusher in program history.
Yeah, and he's got 3 years left if he wants to take them. Imagine
crazy.
that.
That's so crazy.
So I think he's like 80 yards from that, something along those lines. So if there's a bowl game or if there's a conference title game, I'm sure we'll talk about that scenario. But he's right in the mix to be able to break those records, and that's crazy because he set high goals for himself and he hit all of them.
I thought he was patient today, especially early on. Like there wasn't a lot of stuff there, and he was just kind of taking his time, letting stuff develop. And it's like Frank Harris kind of joked about it post game. Like he just hits these home run balls.
Yeah.
And just boom.
There's these plays where it doesn't look like there's that much there that he turns into 4 or 5 yards, and then there's these plays where, one of his big touchdowns, it was a play that was designed to flow to the right.
Yeah.
And he just hit one cut back to the middle, and there was just wide open field there.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people would think to make that move, and then would have the ability to get by that one guy that's containing that edge and then break it all the way with the speed component of it too. So just an incredible player, and it's hard to even figure out what to ask about him in the postgame. It's like he just does this every week, and this one's just a little bit more.
It's phenomenal. On the pregame radio show, I felt like I said we're gonna be talking about Sincere as the greatest Roadrunner in program history because of what he does, the consistency, and the thing that no one talks about is his durability. He was trucking dudes today, and
late in the game, he really didn't even need to be there.
Just all season long, he's been dependable. Even when he wasn't getting the yards in some of those games, he was still, right there to give him the production. How many 30 carry games as he had.
And there was a couple times where Traylor was like, I don't know if he had everything that he's normally had. I know there was a period of time where he was getting worn down, but then it worked out that with the postponement and the birth of his daughter being back to back,
2 weeks out.
2 weeks out, and so you could see where, first of all, he's fresh as can be, and they're not afraid to go to him as often as they need to, even though they have another good option back there in Brendan Brady. Sincere is just such a special player that they're going to ride him whenever they need to, and again, because he had a little bit of a breather, he can hold up.
I called this the Sincere McCormick game, but UTSA also set a record for team rush, 443 yards. A bulk of that coming from Frank Harris, who had...
And don't forget total offense.
Yeah, total offense,
624.
Yes, which surpasses the 600 yards from the UTEP game a few weeks ago. And just a dominant offensive performance today.
Yeah, they were just clicking on every component of it. You can't run for that many yards without the blocking being there, but... Also, Frank Harris, like you mentioned, broke a lot. He had 100-something yards on 6 carries.
Yeah.
Had the long
71 yard.
Had the long touchdown where it was a QB draw and the field was just wide open.
Yep.
And then he had the 71-yarder as well that almost became the second touchdown for him. And I don't know. It was just like it was easy for them. They just looked like the superior team, especially on the offensive side.
At one point, Frank was 8 for 8 passing, and there were first read routes, and I think Lunny, offensive coordinator Barry Lunny Jr. did a good job of kind of setting that up for him, because it seemed like they weren't going to let him go downtown on the deep balls today.
Yeah, well, at least they didn't even try it, and they didn't have to.
Right.
We saw, I think there's been some criticism that from us even, of can he throw some of these out patterns that are intermediate routes with enough zip to be able to get it done? And I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
And today it was either because of the timing or just how it was structured that they got those plays to work.
Yeah.
There was a lot of these kind of intermediate curl routes or out patterns, and the ball was just on time, and it felt like those guys were wide open even on these pretty simple patterns. I don't know if maybe the coverage was looking for something different or just wasn't there, or if guys were just getting open, but for whatever reason, it felt like it was pretty easy for them, and a couple of the incompletions he had were sort of on the money-ish. Like, they hit the receivers in the hands, and maybe they were tough catches, and, maybe nobody's at fault when a play like that doesn't connect, and maybe there was one or two drops in there, too. So, generally speaking, just a really good game from him, and he didn't have to do the stuff that he struggled with, which is what makes it easy, right? If you don't have to face incredible pressure, and you don't have to connect on deep passes, it's a lot easier to be a quarterback than what you do.
Let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. 2 interceptions, one by Rashad Wisdom, one by Clarence Hicks, three sacks. Not a whole lot of big-time defensive plays, but UTSA did a good job of holding down. I think they were a little, not afraid, but worried about the tempo and pace of this offense from North Texas.
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was like one of their best games, or I didn't think it was a special performance by them. Just from the perspective of, we wanted to see really crisp tackling, I think, because that was the emphasis out of last week. And at times it was there, and at times it wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was just kind of a run-of-the-mill defensive game, and
middle of the road.
It didn't need to be a great defensive game because they were moving the ball so well offensively. Sometimes that's by design, I guess, too, right? It's like you're scoring so well, and you have this cushion that you don't need to be blitzing 8, or you don't need to be playing tight coverage. You just keep everything in front of you. And so, I think it was a pretty, ho-hum defensive game, but that's fine.
You want to wrap up the season now, or is there anything else left in this game you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, we got to get the bigger stuff is more impressive.
So UTSA finishes with 7 wins this season, which, let's talk about that for a moment, which is in the face of all this COVID, first-year head coach. I mean, we touched on it last week a little, that it's phenomenal that they've been able to post a winning season.
Yeah, and we talk about this every week, but it's like, even the games that they don't necessarily win, they were competitive in. And Traylor said, I think it was, 11 weeks, you can't question whether our kids played hard, and I think that's true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the FAU game was pretty ugly, and they weren't always super competitive in that one, but other than that, they've been right there in every game that they've lost, I think, and they just look the part of a team that is so much stronger than they were last year. This game is actually a good snapshot of that. I mean, last year they lost 45-3 against North Texas.
That was a talking point this week.
It was an ugly game, and they weren't competitive, and there was a lot of games where it felt like they just didn't have the same energy level, or that the other teams were just better than they were. And the crazy part is, it's a lot of the same guys who are the key contributors. Even this year, the key players are a lot of sophomores and juniors.
Right.
And granted, that means that they were young players last year, and they are growing and getting better, but there's something about the culture and the way Coach Traylor motivates them that they just bring it to a different level than they have in previous years, and it looks like a totally different team. And part of that is like play calling, offensive and defensive coordinators, and part of that is just like the attitude that they seem to play with week after week.
So this was the last scheduled game of the regular season for UTSA. Jeff Traylor says they're going to use next week as they're not playing next week, so that's almost going to be like an idle week situation.
Right.
Guys are going to get off a few days or whatnot, so we don't know what's going to happen. You and I have talked about some of the scenarios with Conference USA's West Division ad nauseum, and it just feels like it changes from postponement to postponement.
I actually think it's kind of... So, assuming the schedule stands as it is now, I think it's actually really straightforward, which is good. And I think I think it is valid to say if UTSA was going to play Rice this week, they would know by now.
They would have known. If they would have played anybody this week, they would have known.
And it has to be this week because Rice has a really important game against UAB on
Correct,
the 12th.
yes.
So it's not like they're going to pencil Rice in there. So let's just assume UTSA is done then. UTSA is in at 5-2, and if you're Conference USA, why wouldn't they be done at 5-2? They're the only team that's played 7 games.
Right.
So let's reschedule everybody else who hasn't played, right? So if they're not going to add any other games, the Conference USA title game berth comes down to UAB against Rice game on December 12th. Because if UAB wins, they'll be 3-1 in the league, which is better than 5-2 in the world that
Yeah.
And I know that will rub some people the wrong way, and I don't like it a lot either. But
so let's explain that in layman's terms a little bit. So it's the winning percentage.
The winning percentage is how they determine the conference champion.
So that's the pecking order.
And honestly, you can just stop there because I think everybody's going to hit the minimum.
Right.
They said that to qualify for consideration,
the caveat,
you have to play at least within 2 games of the average number of games.
And that sounds more complicated than it is, but I think we've kind of calculated that everybody's going to be able to qualify for that.
I think even if everybody plays all the time the rest of the way, it's going to be like 6.4, and so then that'll round down to 6, and 2 games less than that is 4.
So everybody's
playing. UAB's in the mix at 3-1.
3-1. Yeah.
Now, if that game gets knocked off, then they wouldn't have enough. Or, gosh, no, it wouldn't even matter.
Yes.
Because at 2-1, UTSA is 5-2, and they're better.
Yeah.
So you have to presume that what's relevant is that UAB plays Rice, and if they win that game, they're in. Now,
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today.
Yeah.
That's a long time for UTSA to wait. Now, the other scenario that if you just look at the standings, you're going to wonder about is Louisiana Tech.
Right.
Because they're 3-2. And the way the situation works is if they were to finish the season at 4-2, they would be considered tied with UTSA.
Right.
They've said if one team is 5-2 and one team's 4-2, that's a tie.
Yeah.
So you have the same number of losses and one less
head-to-head in that situation.
But UTSA holds that tiebreaker theoretically.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming it would be insane if the tiebreaker wasn't head-to-head. So I'm assuming that much. And so then basically you can eliminate Louisiana Tech. You beat North Texas here. You can eliminate them. Rice has barely played any games. I don't think they're going to be in the mix. And so it comes down to, is UAB going to get to 3-1 or not?
Yeah.
And what that means is UTSA can win by UAB losing, or they can win by forfeit if the game doesn't happen.
Yeah, which is wild. But it's 2020. And just so everybody knows, these are not rules or things that are written pre-pandemic.
Somewhere.
Yeah, they just clarified that to you this week.
Right. So I don't know why they haven't published that more explicitly. That's a whole other topic of conversation. Maybe they do want to leave themselves some wiggle room on how they could handle it. But I think as it stands now, it's pretty straightforward. Now, I've told you this before. If I was the league, I would have told every team, on Saturday night,
be ready
to find out what's happening, and we're going to schedule the games that we need to schedule to figure out who won this thing.
A pod play situation, almost.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we would invent games like UTSA.
UTSA,
I would just say let's make sure UAB gets 2 more games in. Let's make sure Louisiana Tech gets 2 more games in. Like, let's have the important teams who are in the mix play the games that they didn't get to play.
Well, Rice had their game canceled today, and their head coach had a pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, well I guess
quote.
They have 2 losses too, right?
Yeah.
So you could see where they would be upset about that.
Right.
So I would make sure that those situations are the ones that are addressed up front. Now, Rice has 2 games scheduled, but should one of them be against Marshall or should it be against the West team? I would think it would make more sense to play the West team that they didn't get.
But everybody played an East team. Or did they?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's just not going to be fair.
Threw everything off.
Yeah.
So, but it appears that given that, okay, well, what if that's still happening, but UTSA is not involved because they've already played 7 games?
Yeah.
Maybe that is a thing that we're going to find out tonight or tomorrow, that there's a whole bunch of new matchups.
I would not be surprised if we saw some new matchups announced.
I was checking my email tonight. I just kind of thought that, UTSA was the only game that's happening today.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to make that announcement, they could have done it as soon as this game ended. But seeing as they haven't, maybe they're just sticking with what they had. Maybe they're going to wait and see if the game that's scheduled for Tuesday happens. I mean, that has no impact on the West, I don't think. But it's wild.
What a wild time. So that feels like UTSA's earned the right to play in the conference championship. But who knows? Who knows what
this
happens?
Is the point I was going to make before. If UAB goes 3-1 and UTSA is 5-2, and you want to say, oh well, that's BS. They only played 4 games. Well, they beat you head-to-head, so
you lost to
can't
UAB.
Complain about
right?
That.
Yeah.
It would be like the weirdest thing to see a 3-1 team go ahead of a 5-2 team. You had the opportunity to beat them, and you didn't.
And I think also if you look at the history of UTSA in this conference, when you lose 2 games in conference play, rarely do you make the championship game. So it's just one of those things. It's a crazy year. But now I want to ask you about bowl eligibility, because that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah.
UTSA's won 7 games. The last time they won 6 games, they got passed over for a bowl. And does playing or losing in a conference championship game help or hurt their bowl potential?
If we could have this conversation Wednesday, I'll probably know a lot more. Like, my whole goal this week is to just
hammer the league office with
that we don't even understand, or I don't understand.
So there's 17 bowls or 14
and
bowls.
They just said these are the bowls that sometimes, some years are going to be in the mix.
5 guaranteed.
Then you have all these slashes
of
it's this league or this league or this league, and then
it's the Wild Wild West.
I think. How about the part of when are they going to pick because the Conference USA Championship game is on the.
They moved it back a week.
What's it on the 19th?
2 weeks. They moved it back 2 weeks.
It's on the 19th, and the Frisco Bowl's on the 19th.
I think
right?
they moved it up to the 18th, the Friday. So you're right. You can't play in the championship game and the Frisco Bowl.
So what if Frisco Bowl wants UTSA? They
Or the New Mexico Bowl, I think.
They don't even know until the 12th if they can get UTSA, because UTSA might be in the title. So are they going to change the bowl dates?
Yeah.
Or like my whole goal this week to let you people know is like I'm just have to look up every bowl. What have they said publicly that they're going to do? Who can I bother at the bowl about what they're going to do?
Yeah.
And then same for Conference USA of like, well, which of these are actually on the table and how does it get? Like, I don't know. So we'll figure it out, I guess.
Jeff Traylor wasn't having none of it. Future, he's just gonna.
Yeah, I do believe genuinely that they just don't know.
Right.
Now, do I believe that they're not interested? I don't,
Right.
But the part where it's like too confusing to have a good grasp on it,
Yeah,
or to commit
that makes
time
sense.
to get a grasp
Yeah.
on it it's fine.
Yeah. I think Sincere McCormick said it best, though. I think, did he say they deserved to keep playing?
It was the first quote in my story. I think he
Yeah.
said that they deserved to, like, what more could they have done was basically
Right.
the way he sort of phrased it.
Unfinished work, I think.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if they get that opportunity. It's wild to imagine that there's a world where this is the last time we're coming to you from post game, but I guess it's possible,
After
right?
7 wins, first time since 2013, I think, Jeff's really turned things around here, and I think the way this team has played, especially down the stretch here this season, where kind of anything could have happened with the quarterbacks and the offense and the whole defensive coordinator situation. There's a lot of excuses that could have been made to, drop a game or two here, and all of a sudden you're at 6-5, and you don't look as attractive.
So even if this is it was a great season for them.
Phenomenal
and they did
season.
everything they could be
Yeah.
asked to do. Because the only other factor I think of in all of our ramblings that we didn't get to is the COVID situation nationally being what it is.
It's
Who
wild
knows
right
how many
now.
of the bowls are going to survive that?
Yeah.
And what the benefit is to doing that if you don't feel like you're going to have fans. And so, like, how that thing develops where it's like 2 weeks later you start to realize that 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, if there was a lot of COVID arising from Thanksgiving travel and things like that, well, how does the national landscape change and how does that trickle down?
It's going to be
bowls?
wild. Usually it's a bowl week, and I think Jeff talked about it a little bit on his radio show. And if they are to go to a bowl, it's going to be like the day or two before, and they're going to be quarantined in their bubble, and they're in and out. So it's a whole brave new world.
So we know they're not practicing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yep, that's what he said.
And then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to get something.
Yeah. Who knows? Stay tuned. Well, that'll wrap it up from a big UTSA football win. Greg, hold on. Let's talk a little bit basketball.
I knew you were going to ask.
The Roadrunners tipped off the season yesterday.
Yeah. We're got to be like 20 minutes in. We'll keep it tight for the people. But yeah, I'm down.
So they're 1-1. They lost today at UTRGV, but got a few new players that look to be pretty good.
I think Eric Parrish and Cedric Alley Jr., who both started, are going to be very relevant in terms of bringing a lot of the things that they didn't have last year defensively and with length.
Yep.
So Parrish is another option. It seems like to be a ball handler and create offense too. So maybe that solves one of the problems that they faced last year, where defensively it just feels like they weren't at the level they needed.
They were not a good defensive team last year.
There were also a lot of games last year where
the offense
shot 2 for 23 from 3 and didn't win because of that. And that's probably still going to happen, just the nature of the way the team works. So it's going to be a season where if you get hot from 3, you can win, and if you don't get hot from 3, you'll probably lose. But hopefully, from their perspective, they have enough defense this time around that maybe you can ride out 1 or 2 of those tough games.
Yep.
Today we just got to look at the stats. It looked like UTRGV shot 45%.
Yeah, they're on fire, I think.
And UTSA shot 20% from 3 or something like that. And that's just how you lose games in basketball. So I don't know if it's not the end of the world, and we'll see. Once the results matter a little bit more in the conference season, you'd like to avoid some bad luck like that where the other team just hits everything. But again, I didn't see the game. Maybe they took a lot of bad shots too.
We were talking about football and COVID, the world, the impact it's having on that. Basketball, it's going to be even more wild. I think we're in for a bumpy ride. OU got canceled the season opener. They're trying
that
day.
They were already in Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And there was that first week of the season, there was about 40 teams that had shut down. Because basketball's a little bit different in terms of, and different teams have handled this differently. Gonzaga had a couple of positive cases, and then we're still able to play. But a lot of teams, when 1 or 2 guys test positive, you just shut it down. Like, how do you not contact trace everybody?
Yeah.
there's 16 guys on
Y'all
the,
are
on the roster.
practicing each
and-
other.
right,
Yeah.
right. So that's one where it's like if something happens, it feels like you have to pause. But everybody, I guess, looks at the letter of the law and sets
Yeah.
their protocols a little bit differently. So it'll be interesting to see if a situation arises, how UTSA handles it and what their protocol would be. But luckily, so far, they've been able to avoid that.
We'll see. Roadrunner basketball back in action next Friday night at the Convo.
Friday
Historic Convo.
afternoon, I
Yeah.
think.
So
Weird schedule.
well, that'll wrap it up. We'll check back in with you guys whenever there's anything new. Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Appreciate you doing this all year long. Hopefully,
course.
we'll do it in the postseason one more time, maybe
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah.
JJ
Maybe
Perez. Yeah. Appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.